Today, I want to talk about the ongoing 20th Congress of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, what the meeting is about, why people are paying attention to it, and where, in my opinion, China is heading in the next 5 to 10 years. Headlines that Xi Jinping, the current leader of the party, is going to stay for the third term gives people the impression that the CCP Congress is kind of like a party election, in authoritarian style, of course. This is true to some extent, but the Congress agenda actually covers a lot more than that. We'll talk about it later. I don't recommend searching about the Congress mission or objectives in Wikipedia because it is just really boring to read and will definitely confuse you. What's the difference between a Central Committee member and a standing Central Committee member? What's the difference between a Secretariat of Central Committee and the General Office of the Central Committee? Please save yourself from these unbearably long names. But I think as an observer of Chinese politics, it's helpful to get familiar with a word or two. Why not? They are the Central Committee, and within that committee, a small group of people called the Political Bureau. We will just call it Politburo. Apart from other communist countries like North Korea and Vietnam, you won't be able to find any counterparts of these institutions because they're not real institutions like the Department of Defense or Department of Finance. The 200-ish members of the Central Committee include the highest ranking officials from local provinces, minister of various departments, and top army generals. They are the party leaders by definition. You can brag for a long time if you have ever seen or met any of these people. Please tell me if you did. 25 of these highest ranking committee members belong to the Political Bureau. Whoever that first translated the word Political Bureau didn't do a great job, in my opinion, because in other countries, Bureau is mostly associated with some of the softer government sectors like the Environment Bureau or the Development Bureau. They're usually cross departments and doesn't carry the kind of exclusiveness that the Politburo does. Okay, enough of my complaint. Let's talk about who are in these institutions. As we all know, the Minister of Finance is a pretty important job in the US and Europe. But Xiao Jie, the previous Minister of Finance of China, is not in the Politburo. He is only a Central Committee member. On the other hand, Wang Chen, the former chief of the People's Daily, the official newspaper of the Communist Party, is in the Politburo. I think it says a lot about where the Communist Party puts its emphasis on. And I'm by no means criticizing the makeup of the Central Committee. In fact, in the past decade, more and more technocrats make their way to the Central Committee, which is commonly seen as a place that puts loyalty over capability. Before I talk about the once in 5 year Congress, which I think is another bad translation, I want to talk about how the selection of party leaders is related to the central and local government personnel in China. Take Shanghai as an example. Shanghai has a mayor who does what a mayor does. He makes sure the subway runs smoothly, the streets get cleaned, the food, the water is safe. But like all other cities in China, Shanghai has a so-called municipal party secretary. You may think of a secretary as someone working for the mayor, carrying his suitcase wherever he goes. It is exactly the opposite. Li Qiang, the party secretary of Shanghai, is not only superior to Gong Zheng, the mayor, he is a member of the Politburo, while Gong Zheng is just a Central Committee member. Unlike a shadow mayor in a lot of Western big cities, the party secretary gets far more publicity and credits than the city mayor. Basically, you have two worlds, a real world and a party world. What usually happens is, when someone gains prominence in the real world, he will automatically be promoted in the party ladder in the next Congress. It's like a pat on the back. In the other direction, if someone already holds a high place in the party ladder, he or she may get parachuted to a key position in the government or a state enterprise. Again, I don't see this as a Big Brother style alternate reality. This interplay of government roles and party ranking is common in almost all countries. China just institutionalized it early on. This practice actually can be traced back to the Song Dynasty 1,000 years ago. After introducing all these contexts, I think we can talk about the ongoing Party Congress itself, finally. The Congress, as usual, will give a few announcements or victory speeches. Nothing really new from these speeches, but political analysts can always find something interesting, some nuances that bring about all kinds of speculations. For example, the opening speech given by Xi mentions the word safety or security about 90 times, whereas in his last speech 5 years ago, he mentioned it only like a few times. So will China increases its military spending drastically? Apart from the overwhelmingly positive speeches, the main objective of the Congress is to elect new Central Committee members and Politburo. This video will definitely draw more attention if I give my prediction about how long will Xi stay in power or who will enter the Politburo, especially the Standing Committee, the 7 most powerful people in China. This video is not about that. I want to talk about something that even the Chinese people tend to forget. It is the fact that the Congress is really about level setting the different opinions within the Communist Party itself and setting a general tone for the next 5 years. You may be thinking, isn't that what all party meeting is about? You see, famous parties like the American GOP, the Labour Party in the UK, the Dutch VVD, their primary goal is to win more seats in the parliament. So they often allow political mavericks to be their leader since he or she may be more liked by the public than the party seniors. In the CCP's case, however, they don't have a political rival. Does it mean they can do whatever they want? The answer is no. Look at Singapore's People's Action Party, which the CCP takes as a role model and learns from it from time to time. The weight of decision on a single party is not less, but more than if you have a full-fledged multi-party system. The pressure comes mostly from inside instead of from outside of the party. Let's say if Xi Jinping wants to raise taxes on the rich. He can, of course, push it through by command, by force if needed. But think about the consequences. If things go south, which is almost certainly the case, what will the other party leaders think of him? Let alone the general public. What I meant to say is that power always comes with a cost. If you have more power centralized, the higher the chance that people within your party will feel grieved and hatred towards you, eroding the base of your power. What we see on Xi is that once he gained his power, he started to delegate to his allies, who he believes are better for the actual job. Take the example of Hu Yaobang, a party leader renowned for his consciousness for the victims of the Cultural Revolution, and a relatively liberal-minded person even compared to Deng Xiaoping or Wen Jiabao. His stepping down in 1987 after only 5 years at the helm is basically because most party leaders at the time didn't agree with his approach to liberalization. So yes, in China, a leader can be abandoned even without a coup or public outcry. Even though Xi now seems to have a firm grip on his power, he still needs to make compromises and lean on others to achieve certain goals. Make no mistake, Xi is very conscious about his doing and his reputation. He cannot risk breaking the consensus of his own party. That being said, the Party Congress is not a place where Xi negotiates with other party leaders because most of the back and forth have already been done in the past 5 years. The party's Congress is only to put a stamp on what's already on the table. Of course, to achieve such consensus, Xi would have to make tremendous effort to promote his allies to the Central Committee, who in the future may get a spot in the Politburo, which is not Xi's own herd, but more like a palette of different party factions, trying to strike a balance. In other words, Xi cannot just appoint someone to be in the Politburo. There are hard restrictions like experience and age, but most importantly, he needs to strike a balance between his allies and enemies, so as to avoid a de facto split among the party leaders. Liu He is probably the closest to an exception of this role. He has been a friend with Xi for decades. But before his vice premier job and Politburo ranking, he had been working at a high-level government think tank for many years. The fact that he had never taken any top job at local government or major department is very unusual. Another political star is Chen Min'er, known to Xi since their time in Zhejiang province. He is unique in that he took charge of Chongqing after a series of political scandals and fallouts in the local government. A challenge, but also a clear sign of trust by the top leader. Before Chongqing, Chen Min'er was in Guizhou province, which Xi took as the touchstone of his poverty alleviation strategy. I won't be so surprised if Chen becomes one of the standing member of the Politburo this year or 5 years later. To answer the question of how long Xi will stay in power or who will succeed him, my answer is, whenever he believes the next Politburo consists most of his own people. At that time, whether the person who succeeds him is a close ally or not doesn't really matter. This all sounds like a classic power struggle, isn't it? A person's only goal is to grab the top job and keep it that way until he dies. Unlike a Western government whose legitimacy is given by virtue of an election, a CCP leader has years of political struggle ahead before he can carry out his own agenda. Again, both models have their advantages and shortfalls. On the one hand, after the fights and bruises, the leader will have a stronger, even blind support from his officials when implementing a policy. But on the other hand, and as many Chinese people expect, a more brutal curb on public opinion and expression. Personally, I'm against the mindset that consensus within a society is equivalent to silencing of the critics. I think people will find their own ways and weapons to antagonize a government, like quiet quitting or stop making babies. But before I jump to the conclusion that the Communist Party is just a power-craving animal and the party congress is nothing but a hypocrite show, I always remind myself of how condescending the officials who work at a government agency or a bank were when I was a kid, or how people were gushing money out of corruption and then leave the country without a blink. They were not aimed at me, but I don't want to see it happen again. I get it. There's no excuse for violating certain human rights, even from a government who provides safety and jobs. But I just don't see how the CCP can still remain afloat without the acquiescence and collaboration of rational citizens. I can see the debate down the road about whether the Chinese citizens are indeed rational or are they just brainwashed. All I can say is you can find examples of heroic fights people take on for their freedom, but you will also find examples in dark corners in history where people chose to be, quote unquote, unfreed. I believe it's in the Communist Party's leaders' mind, or at least some of them, that with the scale and speed that the world is changing now, as long as the CCP can keep the boat afloat, we will be the last survivor. We will survive the other world powers that either end up in a war or self poisoning. Kind of like how China fell to the ground in the 19th century. This kind of thought, no matter if it will be true or not, will make the CCP more assertive of its self proclaimed role.